as part of this presentation, I want to make sure that I, of course, ensure that you get the right information and information basically around not just what we do from a lead pack consulting perspective, but also give you a little bit more insight in what is happening in the world. The one thing I would like to start with is the following. Okay. I had an introduction slide, but Amy provided a great introduction, and I appreciate that. So yes, I'm a BRM leadership coach and facilitator. I'm an author. I write articles. I do a lot of different things. I have the BRM Cafe podcast. I just restarted that recently. Got some things up for that. We do a lot of workshops, facilitation, a lot of coaching and consulting with organizations around business relationship management. But I want to take it a little bit different. When BRM Institute asked about, hey, do you want to do the BRM demo day? And I had some like, okay, what do I demo? How do you demo things, etc. And it's more for tools basically. And then I had some like, yeah, you know what? I do tools. I actually have tools. I have lots of tools. But maybe in an area where you're not expecting this, this is my workshop at home, at least part of the garage that I confiscated as a workshop, and I make stuff. Yeah, I realized that I use the tools. But it's kind of interesting, but just not about the tool itself. It's you see lots of tools here, but I found through building some of the things that you see here on the side that every situation is different. Sometimes you need to use things in a slightly different way. The approach is different. Sometimes the tool doesn't work for the situation you're in. And also things are very complex. Sometimes wood doesn't work the way you think it would work. And then you realize that you don't have the right tool, although you thought you had the right tool. So again, this is a little bit of the start of my presentation. Sometimes it is not the tool that you need. It's not the necessarily the approach. Sometimes is the complexity of what you're working on requires you to rethink how to do things. And I think that's what I enjoy in everything I do. And that's why I actually showed you this. And yes, these are this middle picture here, all the stones, basically, those are worry stones. I'm building these nowadays. These are very slick, basically made wood, and you see all different kind of different types of woods. And I learned a lot from that, from sanding them, from polishing them, etc. And it's kind of interesting to do this. So this is what I do to relax. Now, I don't have to have all different kind of other people actually helping me because I can do this all myself. The only one that helps me sometimes is the person at the hardware or the hardwood store, basically in this case, and helping me to figure out what good woods are. But this is for me. I think something that is core at everything we do. We need to be able to handle complexity. So my process here in this presentation is to set a little bit the stage. Then I'll go into two worlds I'm going to describe. This is a little bit of storytelling. World 1 and World 2. And then after that, I will show you an organizational relationship management approach that we use and focusing on some questions and answers. I will try to make sure that at the end of this session, you will have some time to maybe stretch your legs and actually get a break, unless, of course, I get lots and lots of questions. Let me start with setting the stage. It's not easy building relationships, and we've never said it was. There's quite a lot of different things happening, and it can go in a lot of different directions. I put the Tale of Two Cities from Charles Dickens here, the opening sentence. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity, and etc., etc. It was the season of light, season of darkness, etc. And I love that because I think that so represents the role we have in organizations. When we look at organizations, some things it is great and sometimes it's not so great. Now, trying to figure out what makes things great can help us to further develop our organization. Yeah, if we look back on the past and look at successful initiatives and things that worked well, that's what we can learn from. And I quite often like to learn from those kind of successes, because if we can replicate that, if we can figure out a way to do that, that is where really the value is going to be. Now, what are the main challenges for organizations at this moment? Trust building. We don't trust each other. We don't connect well with each other. We see other groups actually doing things that we have some like, hey, why are you doing that? There's not a lot of communication. We miss communication. We don't use the right communication channels. We sometimes don't have our shared purpose and decision making. We have a lack of role clarity. There's an interdependence between groups that we don't take into account. There is diversity. Now, for me, the biggest challenge in organizations is collaboration to deliver results. Now, and why do I very specifically call this out? Because when I talk to executives around relationship management, I quite often do not necessarily start with relationship management. I start with, okay, what is your collaboration challenges? Yeah, what are some of the things that are barriers for you to deliver results? And then one of those is collaboration. Now, collaboration for me is something that can be further developed through relationship building, because if we build good relationships, we quite often see that we automatically collaborate better. Yeah? So that's how I normally bring that. But it also means that when we, as a leader in an organization, when we start to look at what is happening in the organization, we quite often have to distinguish between what is clear, what are things that we can just do, what is complicated, what requires other people to help us, subject matter experts, and even what is complex. What are things that are complex? And when you work in complexity, which a lot of you will do, a lot of leaders will do, and I'm using very specifically the term leader because I think this is a leadership skill, not necessarily just only for business relationship managers, and I'll come back to that. But you need to be able to work with complexity. You need to explore how patterns emerge, how constraints change behavior, and why human systems are not always responding to standard solutions. When we look at the work we do, we often find that humans react differently, have different pathways, have different ways to accomplish things. They have different strengths and weaknesses, and the context of what we're working on can change the way we behave, can change the way we react. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges at the core of relationship management. Being able to handle that complexity in human interactions so that we can clearly establish how we collaborate to deliver results. So that's what I'm going to work on. I'm going to start with the tale of World One, with at the subtitle, The Struggle is Real. Now, in this world, we have a organization, and the C-level executive announces that relationships are important, and he assigns a leader to ensure that relationships are going to be managed. And that leader is going to be the BRM lead in this case, and assigning them to this role and giving them the goal of, okay, build better relationships with other groups. That's where it starts. And that's quite often what we see in organizations. Now, the problem, of course, is this BRM is, in this case, BRM lead is exists here as the role, is assigned to the role, maybe goes on a certification training, but it's one person, maybe a small team sitting between the business and IT or HR and finance or whatever their assignment is. And they're working hard. Yeah, they're working hard on building relationships together with their maybe small team, but nobody quite knows what they do. Yeah? Leadership sees them as kind of a liaison. Business groups see them as spokespersons for this other department, for instance, IT. And IT sees them as business interference. Yes, they've done the certification training. They did BRMP. They did maybe even CBRM, but there's still some challenges. Now, the next part of this is that they do this. Yeah, they build these relationships. They're working together with these business groups, and then the questions come. What is the value you bring? Yeah, every quarter someone asks, "What is BRM actually delivering? Yeah, what are they doing? They're drinking coffee with us, but what is it that they do? And quite often, this BRM lead, in this case, needs to scramble to build what might be called a value report or an impact report, and need to make sure that tickets are resolved, issues are resolved, meetings are facilitated, maybe getting some satisfaction scores. None of it lands. The measures feel small against the scale of organizational problems. Yes, we have maturity levels, but it is like, okay, so what? Yeah, people ask, okay, what is that maturity? Why are we doing this? Frustration starts to build, and quite often it feels like it is difficult to convince the organization of its value, why we're doing things, why are we driving that, and that frustration becomes like an issue. Yeah, it's you can hear it in the organization. People don't see the value of it, and slowly what we're starting to see is that projects fail because that business relationship manager was trying to get everyone on board, but people are ignoring it. People are not doing it. The satisfaction is low. Maybe not with a business group. A business group loves it because it's like, oh yeah, great. Yeah, no, we have someone, a spokesperson, or we can blame someone. Yeah, if necessary. We have this one person in front of us that we can blame instead of. It's easier than blaming a whole IT group. And we're still struggling with convincing the organization what we do. So that project fails, the transformation stalls, business unit feels unheard. Instead of a shared diagnosis, the organization fractures. Yeah. We're being blamed. We're seeing that things are not working well. Now, some of the BRM starts to feel alone. They have something like, why am I trying to get this all done? Why do I have to chase everything down? Why do I need to do this? Why do we need to do that? I don't see change happen. I know how the framework works. I know the approach. I know where we need to go. We need to go to strategic partnership, but we're still behaving like order takers. And at that moment, it is announced that we're going to get a new operating model. This consulting firm comes in and says, we need to have a new operating model. And we're going to do product management because that will solve everything. And that will be the best ever. And we're going to build experiences and experience management, etc. And the operating model shows no role from a BRM perspective. And the BRMs become product managers, or they find other roles in the organization. Now, and you might have something like, why does he explain this negative message? The problem was never the BRM. The problem was treating the BRM as a role to be filled rather than a leadership skill to be embedded in everything we do. And I think I'm confident that every single business relationship manager I've met has struggled with showing their value, has struggled with getting people to collaborate. And it's not about what you're trying to do. You're doing the right approaches. You're doing the right things. It's not your problem. The problem is that the rest of the organization doesn't understand what their role is in a relationship management perspective. Now, World One, of course, is based on some experiences, maybe not in the same extent as you see here, but I'm sure that some of you feel that way sometimes. It's like, okay, what do I do? Why do I need to do this? Maybe a new tool helps, or maybe a new approach helps, or yes, and I'm working really hard. I'm working 60 hours, 80 hours per week to be able to actually get this all done. And it seems like I'm just trying to get the organization to move somewhere and it doesn't want to move. We need to pivot. We need to think about this differently. This is where World 2 comes in. BRM becomes a leadership language. The world tells, this world basically is the same organizational story, same pressures, same complexity, but the outcomes is different. It's not just the BRM. And I was looking for images when I built this presentation, and I think a murmuration of birds that you see here in this picture is, I think, the key part. An organization is a living organism. It needs to all work together. And it's not just the BRM that needs to create that. It is the whole organization that needs to work together and needs to collaborate. It's woven into how we need to think, communicate, and make decisions. So how does this work? So we still have that C-level executive that says, I need to build better relationships. Yes, that is assigned to a role. There might still be a BRM team lead, but it also is recognized that everyone in the organization will have a role in there. And from a C-level executive perspective, or from an executive level perspective, we're starting to see that we don't just let the BRM take full accountability or ownership for this. It becomes a leadership ownership. Yeah, and that means that every leader has a part to play in this, and that's part of the initial communication. The other thing is that because this is a wide variety of people that need to have this knowledge, you start with very much practical BRM training. You start with, okay, let's just figure out how to build better trust in the organization. How are we going to improve certain relationships? How are we going to sit together and do that? And I find that that is where the practical part actually comes in, because maybe the BRM lead took a certification course. Great. Yeah, absolutely valuable. But sometimes other leaders in the organization need to have certain things understood, need to understand what to do. And the conversations start in this case from a shared purpose. Yeah, so we're not seeing relationships as, okay, an objective. It's a means to an end. The idea behind this is that we collaborate, that there is a common language, that there's trust in the room, that we can work together. Yeah, and that's part of this new message that we need to bring. Value is co-created. Yeah, it's not just one. Value is defined together. Yeah, we might build value statements that can help us to create a better language. We know that there are certain outcomes that we need to have, and those outcomes could be knowledge gain. Yeah, better knowledge based on the systems we have. It could be behavioral changes, but in the end, it is about changing organizational conditions. Impact on strategy, impact on goals, and we all are working in the same direction. I often ask groups, tell me a success story, and I'll after they tell me the success story, I'm like, okay, what was so different? Yeah, what was different? And one person said, he said, one of the things we did at the start of every meeting, every team meeting. He said, we were so clear about what the purpose was. We were so clear about what the goals and the objectives were, that everyone was focused on that. And that meant everyone was behind it. Everyone actually just put their phones away and had something like, we need to get this done. Yeah. And the value that we got out of those meetings was way more than when it was like, okay, well, yeah, we don't really know what we're working on, and we're just discussing initiatives, etc. That's it. So the relationships that we built in that initiative helped us to create the value. But also, relationships are built to handle tension. If I have good relationships, I can handle the tension. I can handle the different perspectives, the diversity of views. I can suddenly say, you know what? Yes, I can do that. And that's what we're trying to see and trying to create in organizations. The organizations gets unstuck. Yeah, transformations actually succeed this, not because the plan was perfect, but because the relationships were strong enough to adapt. People escalate faster, decide better, and trust each other more. Yeah, and you will start to see the relationship management principles are becoming visible in how executives facilitate strategic conversations, how middle managers navigate complexity and competing priorities, and how teams surface problems early. The relationships help us to do that. So we handle the complexity better through better collaboration, and we navigating competing priorities, and we have discussions around that. This is way easier in the relationship if the relationship is good. Now, you can't bring this on the shoulders of a BRM team. This is a shared responsibility in the organization, and that needs to be communicated to all parts of the organization. It is not just the BRM. The BRM might business relationship manager in this case, might be leading a lot of the efforts around this and maybe creating certain and facilitating certain situations where it is easy to build relationships, but everyone has a part of that. Yeah, that's how the organization gets unstuck. BRM becomes the culture. Relationship building is part of the culture. We see practical BRM training, and we call it practical BRM training based on the fact is that it just uses scenarios, discussions, how you do this, how do you do that, because human interactions are complex and people will react differently. When they react in one situation, it might be totally a reaction in a different situation. You need to prepare people for that. You cannot build a standard approach. You can't build a standard form and saying, this is how we do this. And I think that is so important to recognize that, yes, we can have tools to support ourselves, but and this is where I'm coming back to my work as a hobby, basically in working with wood. I sometimes need to step back and think this is not the right approach. I need to do this differently, and we need to work together to make this a different approach. Yes, we did this in the past, but this requires something else. The collaboration to the results. That is what we're looking for. Now, in World 2, when BRMs evolves into what I call quite often organizational relationship management, ORM, sometimes shifts, it's no longer a role defining its value. It becomes a living system and one that creates impact, drives results, and sustains itself because every leader owns it. Now, I want to talk now a little bit more about what we do to help organizations with this, because you saw the two worlds. Yeah, you see the differences. The feel is different. The emotions are different quite often. And are there still issues? Yes, but we can handle them based on good relationships. And there is still a very much a need for business relationship managers to do this. I wrote an article recently around BRM and the operating model. And I think that at the core, BRM exists everywhere. Yeah, relationship management exists everywhere. That's what I call organizational relationship management. Do you need business relationship managers? I mean, quite often people ask me, when you talk about this, and everyone does this, why would we even have an assigned BRM role? For certain situations, you have to assign someone dedicated to manage the relationships. If it's very important for the organizations to get that collaboration to results going. If there's a certain business unit that absolutely needs to have someone leading the relationship management, absolutely. But it can also be a part-time role with someone else. It can be an operations manager or a facility manager that says, you know what, I will do some of the relationship with these groups, etc. as well. It's maybe less important to assign someone full-time. For me, the priority is quite often from a BRM perspective to ensure that people actually have that. Now, how are we addressing this? And this next slide is way too big for all of this. I have an image this as a PDF, and I can send that to you later on. I will, at the end of this presentation, I will give you my details, etc. But and you can get this. But for me, organizational relationship management is leadership capability of cultivating relationships across an organization to create value, impact, and results. What you see here is handling complexity even in this. I use as the base here two things. One is the complexity. Well, actually, three things. Sorry. I use the complexity theory from David Snowden, Cynefin framework, in everything we do, basically. You also see here that it has observe, orient, decide, and act, which is elements of the OODA loop from Captain John Boyd, which I think is it's always difficult to represent that on the slide because it is not something that is step by step. It happens all at the same time, which is quite often difficult to represent on the slide here. But I've added two things here, and specifically from an education perspective, we quite often need to have some practice and we need to have results, of course. The key thing here is that we observe what is happening. And the third point here is also the behavior are changing. Yeah, we pinpoint the relationship behaviors worth measuring. For instance, we in Orient we read to be the drivers behind those behaviors. For me, it's important that we understand that organizational behavior management, organizational change management, and organizational relationship management are three elements in an organization that need to be addressed. We need to address the change, we need to address the behaviors, and we need to address the relationships. And that's three different groups quite often that need to work together. So we observe, and in this observe, that C-level executive observes certain circumstances and realizes that we need to build better relationships. Now, assigning a BRM lead would mean that they need to orient themselves. They need to have some situational awareness. They need to understand the culture, the heritage of the organization, the new information, etc. And they start looking at, okay, what can we do best? Yeah. And we assign some key resources to lead the relationship management initiative. And that can include specialized training to just get them up to speed. And that could be anything from certification courses to introduction courses, etc. And maybe they just read, they read books, they listen to podcasts, the YouTube channel, etc. It's all part of our of what we deliver. And then we need to have workshops. We need to get people thrown into situations. How do you react to that? We need to do scenario-based training. We need to make sure that we cultivate relationships. We have this an understanding of what kind of behaviors we want, and we have a repeatable way to shift those behaviors. We then start to decide the guide to behaviors, clear feedback, attainable next steps, etc. We decide how our relationship management approaches are going to work. But we also need to realize now that the learning and development programs need to be further expanded. We see specialized leadership courses, certification courses that are focused on relevant leadership skills. Yeah, so, I want to have those key resources. Yeah, I want to make sure that that I start with that, but it needs to expand beyond what we're doing. We start seeing that we need to have workshops. Yeah, we have 2 new workshops. We updated those, leading with relationships and leading with impact. They're practical foundation of relationship management skills, and they're really focused on just wider than just a BRM role. They're just really going into leadership skills around trust building, etc. I'll show that in a moment. And where we need a learning and development program for the whole organization. Yeah, we need to act, we need to experiment. You'll see here that there is a thing here on the top, feed forward. Yeah, you feed forward the information that you need to have, but you also need to do feedback. Although it looks like sequential here, I can tell you that in the acting phase, you might have to go back to the start and observe certain things and say, hey, we need to change that, or we need to do that differently. So there is a constant back and forth between all the different areas. That's the complexity we're working in. But the experimentation in the acting phase and learning and development is going to be key. We need to recognize and reinforce the behaviors that work from a relationship perspective. And then, of course, we're getting to results. Relationships are nurtured everywhere. Now, you see several things. We deliver certification courses. We deliver an OBM, an Organizational Behavior Management certification course. We do, of course, BRMP. And I'm sure that some of you have taken BRMP with us. We do the CBRM course. And then we have additions, the leadership courses that are more wider. They do not replicate anything from BRMP and CBRM. They are going into very specific topics that are an extension of what the certification courses do and make that more practical. We're very much focused here on things that can be immediately applied. Yeah, and so that's what we're actually looking for. I did actually have a slide that was slightly bigger, but I'll leave that in there. I do want to talk a little bit around what we do. So we provide thought leadership. We do a lot of published articles. I wrote a few articles for the BRM Institute, one on relationship management and cybersecurity, and then recently one for a BRM IT business partner and product manager and product owner. and what the relationship is between those. I've wrote some other articles which are on our website, basically, which is BRM in the operating model and how we can see that. We wrote some books, of course. We do the BRM Cafe. We have a couple of new podcast episodes lined up, etc. So, and we do a lot of things around organizational relationship management. Yeah, just bringing it wider than just BRM role, and really looking at, okay, how can we build organizational relationship management? I work with a lot of organizations where we drive that perspective in a lot of parts of the organization. Yes, we do the certification courses, BRMP, CBRM, etc. Like I said, we also do very specific facilitated workshops and courses for organizations. So quite often we get a question, okay, how can you help us? And then we actually take certain topics that are suitable for them to be able to address that, and then the different approaches you can actually take for that. And then we do some executive coaching, strategic facilitation, and mentoring and coaching. Now, I want to briefly talk about, I don't want to spend too much time on what we're on all of this, and feel free to ask questions later on. I do want to talk about the two new programs we have. So Leading with Relationship is 5 sessions. It's practical training based on navigating complexity and situational awareness. So we have 5 sessions, and each of them have 2 or 3 key topics with exercises, etc., and scenarios. So trust under pressure is first one, and then reframing the conversation. Quite often, how do you reframe language? We are going to talk about in the session 3 around shaping behavior, and then repairing and strengthening complex relationships. And then telling the story of relationship value. We do spend some time on that. That's Leading with Relationship. It's a new program, so 5 half days, but it can be brought into organizations, etc. as well. So looking forward to having this new program up. We've done a lot of these things already in smaller areas for organizations, but we wanted to offer this as an open enrollment course. And then the other one is Leading with Impact, which is practical training based on impact and value. So we're going to talk about value statements. I will do at the BRM Connect conference a workshop on value statements. So I will use one of the scenarios that we use in this session to show you at BRM Connect what that looks like. So we're going to run through a scenario around value statements and how they change along the way. And then we spent in session 2, for instance, reading context, strategy, sources of value, how we get from initiatives to clear outcomes, and then navigating assumptions, improving the case over time. And then telling the story of impact, and telling the story of what we do. So that's what we do. I had planned to do this for 40 minutes, and I succeeded again. I'm always happy when I just feel that on time, because I want to give you time to actually ask some questions. I'll put this in chat as well, but also want to do some QA, but I can't see chat so at this moment, because when you present, apparently Microsoft doesn't like you to be distracted. So I will stop sharing here, so I can actually see what is happening, and if there's even questions there. I am going to just write my email, etc. in there. If you want the service briefs or more information around the courses, if you want the image of organizational relationship management, I can easily address that, and I can send that to you. Gooey. So yeah, okay, I'll give you continuous feedback on this as well, Gooey. The SO needs to be in a ZO. That's the Dutch part. So, but I appreciate the effort. Let's just say that.